Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Scouse Science Podcast. My name's Professor Tom Solomon. I'm at the University of Liverpool, and I'm a professor of neurology here, and I'm also the director of the UK's Emerging Infections Research Unit, which is based here at the University of Liverpool. My guests today are Jane Garvey of BBC Woman's Hour and Saye Khoo, professor at the University of Liverpool. Would you like to say hello, guys?
Hi, hello.
Hello.
Now, are you seeing my screen? I need to check that.
Yes.
You are. Okay, good. So that's a picture of us. I think we know what we look like, which is great. We do have a couple of other slides we were going to show people, so those will come up shortly. But I should also let you know that Holly Ellis is going to be joining us a little bit later on. She is a real Scouse scientist, as opposed to some of us who are close approximations. So you're seeing the PowerPoint slide, is that right? Say, help me here. We haven't done this before. Yeah. Okay, that's good. People are watching mostly on Zoom, but we also have people joining us on the Facebook. So thanks very much for joining. And we want to hear what you think. We want you to communicate with us. So you can use the chat function on Zoom to say hello. Or in fact, what we'd like you all to do today is let us know how you knew about this webinar. So if you're a first timer, tell us how you heard about it, or if you got the direct invite, let us know about that. But post your messages to us on the chat function. And you can also ask questions of our guests. People always have lots of good questions. So send those in and we'll get to those shortly. If you're doing it on Facebook, you can post, we've got viewers directly on Facebook and you can post your questions there. They'll be fed in. Or you can tweet me at Running Mad Prof and I'll see those as well. This is our fourth Scouse Science. These are some of the previous guests we've had. Frank Cottrell-Boyce, who is a local author, joined us with Louise Kenny. Sharon Amezu is a lawyer and management business consultant. She joined us with Dan Wootton. And you may remember the last one we had, Roger Phillips joined us with Sally Sheard. Roger forgot that he was the person being interviewed, and I think interviewed me as much as I interviewed him. But never mind, that's what you get if you get a BBC presenter on the programme. Thank God we've not got any of that. Oh, we do. I've given Jane strict instructions. Also, it's great. We've had thousands of people watching the live webinars, which is really super. If you missed any of these webinars, then you can catch up by going to your podcast provider. And there's the Apple podcast provider. Also, there's a Google one. I'm going to post the links because we need more of you to go back and look at these previous podcasts. And whilst you're there, we want you to rate them, review them, and subscribe to them. And then that will make us very happy. Anyway, I think that is more or less enough of the housekeeping. Why do we do this Scouse Science? Well, I found that I get asked to talk quite a lot on the telly and on the radio about science, particularly recently with COVID-19, but it's always a little bit rushed. And so what we thought would be fun is to have a little bit more time to consider some of the issues. Also, when you get scientists together, they tend to use language that nobody can understand. So we thought it'd be great to have one of our Liverpool famous faces along to make sure we use English and also to get a perspective on how the pandemic is affecting them. So that's the aim of the podcast. So we're joined today, as I said, by Jane Garvey. Jane, of course, is well known for being a BBC Radio 4 Woman's Hour presenter, which I think you've been doing for the last 13 years. Is that right, Jane?
Yes, that's right.
Yes. And you're leaving?
I am leaving, yes.
Okay.
Yes, I'm leaving on the very glamorous date of December the 29th. It's the absolute armpit of the year. The armpit of the worst year in living memory is when I'll be leaving Woman's Hour. So that's brilliant. I'm great with timing. Absolutely brilliant.
All right. Well, we'll come back to that a bit later on. Jane started her radio career in various local stations, but I think the landmark moment was when she was the first voice to be heard on Radio 5 Live when that launched in 1994. She's done many other programs since then. She's won Sony Gold Awards. She is a Scouser. She was born in Liverpool and educated at Merchant Taylors Girls' School in Crosby. We have a lot of people from Merchant Taylors who follow the podcast, so there's many of them listening in today. I hope they'll be sending in questions. Can you remember any of your teachers from there, Jane?
God, yeah, well, absolutely, I can. I was not a scientist. In fact, I was banned from doing chemistry after an incident. So my only scientific qualification is an O-level in biology, grade C, which is pathetic. So my best teachers were my English. I had a brilliant English teacher called Mrs. Barnes, who absolutely believed in me, and I think about her often. Actually, she died unfortunately, but yeah, absolutely, I can remember her. And I had a lot of good teachers, history teachers as well. Science at the time, I've got to be honest, possibly a bit questionable back in the 70s and the early 80s. Yeah, in terms of the way it was taught to girls in particular.
Well, talking of questionable science, let's say hello to Saye Khoo.
Okay.
Saye is an old friend who I've known since I first came to Liverpool about 20 years ago. He's a professor of infectious diseases based in the pharmacology department, and he's also an honorary consultant over the road at the Royal Liverpool University Hospital. Saye, it looks like you're in your office like me. Is that right?
It certainly is.
Okay, so Saye, his work is on drugs for treating infection, particularly HIV and TB, and now more recently, COVID-19. Saye, have you been on the wards today or recently?
Yes, and it's been chaotic and extremely busy.
Extremely busy will take. Chaotic, we must remember our broad audience and people that might be listening. But yeah, busy. I mean, that's what we're expecting, isn't it? Busy and getting busier, I guess. Yeah. Whereas Jane, down in London, things are still relatively quiet. Is that right?
Well, we're ratcheting up to tier 2 at midnight tomorrow night. So that puts a bit of a kibosh on my kids' social life, which perhaps isn't such a bad thing. But it's going to be, it's interesting. I know that the media gets accused of this, and actually it's justified really, that we start to care when things start impacting on London. And I'm probably now as guilty of that as anybody, but my mum and dad are still in Liverpool. So I'm in Liverpool a lot, and I am aware of the restrictions obviously in Liverpool right now. And I also did work at the Royal Liverpool Hospital. That was my first job. I was a medical records clerk there, and my mum was the receptionist. So
right.
yeah, so I think of the place very fondly. Yeah,
Wow.
well, in some ways I do. Yes. Yeah. So I'm interested to know what's going on there at the moment, actually.
Yeah. Well, Saye, how do you think we're coping this time with the increased numbers compared with the first, March, April, May?
Well, in some senses, we are coping better, and in other senses, we're still surprised when perhaps we shouldn't have been quite so surprised by the second wave. It was always going to come, I think. So the wards are very busy. And the difference this time around is that we're trying as much as possible to let life continue as normal, both in the hospital and in society, I guess. And that brings added challenges.
Do you think we're going to be able to? So clearly the hope is to keep routine, well, ideally everything routine going, routine operations, routine care, routine emergency care, cancer care, etc. Do you think we're going to manage that based on the current escalation?
It depends how the trajectory goes, because there is an unseen cost, isn't there, on not just on cancer, but on mental health, on all these other areas that don't immediately result in mortality statistics, but really does impact on us and wider in society. I think I've never known such an amplifier of inequality as the COVID crisis, other than perhaps HIV. So those who had little going in have even less coming out the other side, and I just am so struck by that.
Yeah. Jane, you mentioned your parents are up here in Merseyside. How are they finding things?
Well, they're very fortunate. They're both, one's 87, one's 86. So in some ways, statistically, don't get me wrong, it is worrying. They are in relatively good health, touch wood, and I know they're grateful for that. And they live in sheltered housing. So I am as calm as I can be in the circumstances. I obviously haven't seen them. I saw them last 2 weeks ago. I don't honestly know when it will be sensible or safe for me to see them again. They normally come to London for Christmas. I'm not sure whether that's going to be possible. But I'm one of millions facing lots of the same questions. And I think my generation, so I'm 56, a lot of us left Liverpool in the 1980s and probably never went, well, we, in my case, did not go back to live. And there are many, many of us who now got parents who are very elderly, who are still there. And I mean, I see them, you know, I used to see them all the time at Euston Station, same age as me, going back to Liverpool at the weekend to see mum and dad. So yeah, it's worrying, but so far, and also I should say the management of the sheltered housing they're in have been brilliant at keeping COVID out. But that's not been easy. And it's come at a real price. The social life, which used to be good, is obviously not so good anymore. And rightly so. What
are they doing to socialise aged 87 and 86?
Well, they're all right with the technology. They can. They're okay. They've each got an iPad. I think there's a certain amount of bickering. Let's be honest. I do think this is an under discussed area actually. Is actually you don't hear about relate and marriage guidance and counselling for people in their 9th decade who are now, by force of the circumstances we're in, forced to spend much more time together than they would normally spend. And it's not easy. It is not easy to live in close proximity with another human being at a time of stress. And I was also trying to explain to my children the other day that I don't know what your other guests think, but had this pandemic happened 30 years ago, would anyone have mentioned mental health and the impact on mental health in the way that they do now? And I'm glad they do now. I think it's really important because we are all paying the price. But honestly, I don't think it would have got into the mix 30 years ago.
No. What do you think, Saye?
I think you're right.
I mean, when we look back at other big crises, we look back at World War II, we look back at the 1918 pandemic, which is, nobody is around that remembers that. Even 9/11, people have talked about that as a game changer. And I don't know whether mental health sort of played into what followed those crises, whether it was just ignored.
Well, can I ask? I mean, you might know the answer to this. My grandmother was born in 1900. My maternal grandmother, and she was obviously in Liverpool in 1918 and 1919, around the time of the Spanish flu. And my understanding is it was a big outbreak in Liverpool and in Dublin, and obviously the two cities were closely connected. But she talked about all sorts of stuff. She never talked about that. And I'm really interested that our sort of social history memory of the Spanish flu just seems to have been lost. And I don't know whether it can provide us with any clues about how we recover from all this or whether it's totally irrelevant. But what do you think?
I mean, there are similarities, certainly in terms of the biological response, and everybody was aware that we might have a second wave and maybe even third waves. That's it. I've been reading again about the Spanish flu, I guess, like everybody has. And there's a lot, you read a lot about that, and about how obviously ports were, Liverpool and Dublin, big cities and ports were tended to get affected first. But in terms of the sort of psychological responses, I haven't come across much. Say, I don't know if you have.
No, I guess, as you say, Jane, most of it was left unsaid. I wonder whether there's a sense that you shouldn't be seen to be complaining about something that everybody else had to go through, and yet there must have been a cost, mustn't there? Just as people don't talk about the war, there surely is a cost in the way you behave, in the way you think, in your attitude to risk. This has changed society in such a profound way, and in some areas for good. I mean, I can't see ourselves traveling quite so much in the future and using Zoom a lot more for our meetings. I think things that previously were not possible, doors that previously could not be opened, well, that's all changed now.
Yeah. And of course,
I think our attitude to risk has changed, hasn't it, Tom?
Yes, yeah. I mean, just first of all, on the technologies. So clearly we have these technologies which are a blessing and a curse. In terms of lockdowns, if this thing had happened, say, 20, 30 years ago, before we could do all these, before people could work from home, you just wonder what would have happened. I don't think in the Spanish flu, everybody was told to work from home. You just couldn't work from home, and people had to just do their best, I think.
So more people died as a result then?
Yeah, I don't think that as I understand it, this kind of major lockdown didn't happen back then. I think the wealthy people who could tuck themselves away would try and do that. I suppose the other thing is, in terms of people not talking about it, that was closely associated with the First World War. And I think in general, after the wars, people, especially people who came back from prisoner of war camps, etc., didn't talk about things. You know, a lot of people didn't talk about major traumatic events. That seemed to be kind of the way back then, didn't it?
I guess so.
What about, you mentioned your teenagers and your grandparents. Clearly there are different perspectives. What are your, you've got teenagers, say you've got, yours are a bit younger, I think, aren't they?
Oh, yes. They are a bit younger. So it's 14 and 12 or 11. A very interesting time, and both dealing with it in very different ways.
Go on. Do you want to expand? Are you allowed to?
I think my son, perhaps there's a sort of hidden sociopath in him, is quite enjoying the lockdown, enjoying the independence. But I think children are relating to adults differently, to each other differently. There's obviously the Minecraft economy going on in the background. I guess it will shape their lives. But I think particularly of those people who had to do their A-levels and their GCSEs this year and had some pretty life-changing decisions foisted upon them.
Yeah.
What about your teenagers, Jane?
Well, actually, I'd forgotten one of my teenagers is 20. So strictly speaking, she's not a teenager. She's at university in her third year. So she is actually, I mean, her social life has been curtailed necessarily, but she's still able to have a good time. And I wasn't unduly concerned about her because she's very settled there. The 17-year-old is, her social life has taken a real knock. She was just on the cusp by law of exploring pubs and everything else. And I think she may have been not herself served, but may have had a drink bought for her in a pub. I'm just hedging around it here.
Be careful.
The week before, the week before, every single pub in the country was shut down, which I think I did say it was all her fault that she'd cursed the whole thing so I think that came as a bit of a blow. It's not, I mean, I think what it's introduced into that generation is the idea that life maybe isn't quite as uncomplicated and as clear cut and as on the level as they might have been led to expect. I've tried to have conversations with my friends, people in our 50s, around the idea that did we honestly think that we would live for, let's say, 90 years without anything of this nature happening on our watch, bearing in mind that our parents had perhaps been born during the Second World War and our grandparents had lived through maybe 2 world wars. What did we think was so special about our generation that none of this would happen to us? Nothing on this scale would happen to us. So I'm not, maybe also because I'm a bit of a doom monger and have always been very interested in the BBC's emergency planning and all that sort of stuff. Maybe I'm less surprised by all this than some other people. I don't know.
Gosh.
I have met friends of mine who honestly had no idea that a pandemic was a possibility.
Yeah,
Just
but I think,
me.
I mean, even those of us that, work in this area, I worked on emerging infections all my life. We've always known a pandemic's possible. I have on the back of my door the business continuity plan about how we're going to keep this part of the university running. And at the start of the pandemic, I looked in there, and yes, sure enough, among things like, a plane hitting the building as disasters that we had to be ready for, one was pandemic. So in theory, we've always known about it, but I still think the reality of when it hit certainly left me as sort of dumbfounded as anyone, even though you knew in theory it could happen. I mean, Say, what about you? Were you expecting this every day of the week?
Like everybody else, no. I just wonder, listening to Jane, whether actually one good thing that might come out of this, and I haven't quite seen it yet, is the nature of our discourse. It's so polarized now. When you listen to the radio, even the BBC, it's this is absolutely right, and then someone's arguing that is absolutely right. And actually, what you have in a pandemic is a series of trade-offs between one bad option and an even worse one. And I see so little of that, and you hear the sort of debate coming out of America at the moment, and there doesn't seem to be any idea that life is actually one huge balancing act of trade-offs.
Yeah, I wish you, well, perhaps you have said it in public, because I think that's absolutely right. But the problem is, it's not a very entertaining message. And certainly a lot of speech radio, not necessarily the BBC, is all about entertainment, is about somebody saying something utterly ridiculous and controversial, and then getting the audience to ring in and profoundly disagree or agree for the sake of entertainment.
You're talking about Woman's Hour now, are you, Jane?
I am well, I tell you what, it's interesting. Woman's Hour, I've had a particularly difficult day on the program. It shouldn't have been difficult. It didn't look difficult on paper, but the audience were in a really scratchy mood today, and everything I said, and the way I said it, everything was criticised today. And what's happened with our audience, who are, generally speaking, rather a good bunch of people, is that initially they were really pleased that we were still carrying on, and that we were still live, and that we were still trying to produce the same sort of level of information and entertainment. And they were grateful, and they were really quite nice to us for about a month and a half maybe. But it's all just fallen apart now.
Right.
And so they're carping, they're criticising.
Well, that's the nation, isn't it? To begin with, everyone held together.
Yeah.
Let's pause there. I'm just going to have a look at some of the comments and questions that have come in via. A lot of them are comments actually, as well as questions. But somebody's asking about vaccines, where we're up to with that, and also where we're up to with drugs. Maybe we'll come back to that in a second with you, Say. Mental health wouldn't have been talked about even 10 years ago, or maybe even 5 years ago as it is now, says Glenys Bell. I think that's true. Here we are. Shirley Miller's mum was 9 in 1918 and had a slightly younger sister who died of the so-called Spanish flu in Liverpool. Right. But Shirley doesn't tell us whether it was discussed a lot. Maybe you'll get back to Shirley and say, did the family talk about that, or was it just ignored? Somebody else wants a rollout of vaccine. Yes, okay, we all agree with that one. 50 years ago we had Hong Kong flu. We do get flu outbreaks, and even we had the Mexican flu or swine flu, didn't we say, about 10 years ago? But it was not so severe, I guess, which is why this one has hit us so hard. Here's another one. Somebody whose grandmother, Julie Cunningham's grandmother, was from Seaforth, born in 1907, did talk about the Spanish flu and how ill she was. She went blind for a few days, etc., etc. But no mention of mental health in relation to that. All right. Well, let's just come back to actually Say, you tell us a bit about, maybe not the vaccines, but just tell us a little bit about drug trials and where we're up to with that, and what your role is in Liverpool, because I think here is one of the leading centres, isn't it, for some of the drug trials?
Yes, so I think I'm known, what's known in the trade as a drug dealer, and there are a number of us in Liverpool. So we look at antivirals, and I've been in antivirals for over 20 years with HIV predominantly, and I think there is a big need, notwithstanding the obvious need for vaccines. There is a big need for potent antivirals. And I say that because if you had a potent antiviral and you gave it the right time, sure, people get COVID and the symptoms of the cough and the fever, but that could potentially prevent you from needing oxygen, from deteriorating, from having to come to the hospital, from needing ventilation. And in that scenario, actually, schools could stay open. Pubs could stay open, planes could fly, the whole economy could get back. That would give us a chance to get back to life as once we used to know it. And that's notwithstanding the vaccine, as I say, because the vaccine is clearly the most cost-effective and the most population-effective way of controlling an infection. But A, its success is not a given. B, its protection in 100% of the population is not a given, and we don't know the people most at risk of COVID are the elderly and the immunosuppressed, and we don't know what the vaccine responses are in there. And also, if a vaccine is 60% protective, we'd grab it with both hands, but that's 40% of people who still get sick, still need treatment. So I think it's a antiviral and a vaccine that we really do need.
And in terms of the antiviral, some of the studies that you're involved with or leading in Liverpool are the first-in-man type studies. Is that right? Or you're in a position to do those?
Yeah, so we saw the greatest need there. And I think that when the pandemic hit us, we reached for every antiviral we already had. And so virtually every antiviral for every other viral disease was just thrown at this because it was all we had. But they are for other viruses, and they are repurposed. And the big need here is not for, we're not interested in marginal gains. We're interested in game changers, and those are COVID specific, coronavirus specific drugs, many of which have never been given to humans, sitting in laboratories, and they are there. And so what we wanted to do was to say, well, look, there's a whole array of these drugs. How do we quickly look for them, with the premise that we're actually looking for game changers, and how do we discard things that might be marginally useful, but certainly not going to change the whole landscape, and how do we do that in a way that is safe but fast? And we had a discussion with the UK regulator, the MHRA, about this, and clearly everybody accepts that conventional drug development is not fit for purpose when it comes to a pandemic. It's just too slow. It's not responsive. Yeah. So we in Liverpool, the School of Tropical Medicine and the university, together with colleagues in Lancaster and Southampton Clinical Trials Unit, put together a platform called the Agile platform, which is now gathering pace across the UK and internationally. And Agile is, if I just very briefly to say, it's a completely new way of doing drug development. So it is statistically very efficient. It uses advanced statistics, and I can talk more about that later on.
Spare us. We don't need to.
It is seamless. So instead of normal drug development, you do separate studies in phases. It's all run through. As soon as you're sure that it's safe, you move on. As soon as you got the right dose, you move on. Okay. It is.
How many drugs have been put into the Agile pipeline?
So we've got we're developing 5 trials. 1 trial is open, and the other 4 at various stages. It's flexible. So these agents are all very different. So you can tune the trial you can test multiple candidates at once, but you can tune each trial to the way that the drug works and the way that you're going to use it in society, in real life. So that was the idea.
And what I guess the question that, if this was the Today program on Radio 4, then they would always then say, so when are we going to have the first drug available? When will the first of these be available? And the scientists will always respond and say, more studies are needed, and I need more money. More studies, more money. So, but will we have a drug by Christmas?
So we're not designed. So Agile is there to look at the very early first in man, first in COVID, in fact.
And first in man, I should have explained, means for the first time the drug is being put in a human. So first in man or woman. But will you have completed any of those by Christmas? Will you be able to say, look, here's a new drug and it seems to be safe in humans and it could be effective?
Yeah, we're doing one such agent, and success for us is proving or disproving that a drug's going to have those major effects. It's sufficiently to send it on to a big trial for full evaluation.
Can I just ask, say, a question? Is that all right? It's just about the relative speed of the vaccine, if it is, say, January or February. Will that heighten the anti-vaxxer brigade and get them going and get them galvanized even more than usual? And how much of a problem do you think that might be?
I honestly don't know. It astonishes me that in this day and age we've still got such momentum behind the anti-vaxxer brigade, but we do, and we have to take that seriously. I think I don't think we could ever achieve universal consensus, and there's a sense in which we just must go for it.
I was surprised because at the start of the pandemic, I thought this is the time now when all the anti-vaxxers will fade away. It's so obvious. Everybody's calling for a vaccine. But I was surprised that in fact the opposite happened. The anti-vaxxers seem to, you've had some vaccine discussions on your programs.
Well, we have actually. I know this is what reminded me actually, because the last time we did it, it was just the very standard, please get your children vaccinated, even though lockdowns in operation, MMR is still there, you must have your children vaccinated. And I did it in a very straight way, get your children vaccinated, couldn't have been simpler. And we got an astonishing number of complaints from people saying, why wasn't this discussion balanced? And why didn't you have somebody who doesn't believe in vaccination because they know they're evil? And it's really dispiriting when you get that level of discord. It's just, but I've also heard people say that Boris Johnson dismissed the anti-vaxxers as, quotes, nuts. That doesn't help
Yeah.
either,
No, it
does
doesn't.
it?
No, not at all.
You can't dismiss them. But
No. So what
but
do you do?
Well, can I ask you, Jane, what is a balanced discussion? And I thought about this during
God.
Brexit, and
Yes.
I'm not even going to go from one contentious issue to an even more contentious one. But
No.
do you balance it as giving each side 50% of airtime? Do you
Yeah.
weight your arguments? So, for example, do you weight arguments proportionately, or do you just assign? Do you just say,
Yeah.
well, you can have your say?
Okay, how long have you got here? I mean, that's really, really difficult. Obviously, the BBC line on vaccination, by the way, is that it doesn't require balance. The vaccinations are good, and you must have your child immunised. End of. But today, for example, it's quite a good example. I did a relatively simple, straightforward interview-ish with a woman who'd had an adult diagnosis of ADHD and was now being helped, or so she claimed, by the medication that she was on. And she's written a memoir about it called Better Late Than Never, or something, about how her diagnosis has transformed her life. And I felt I should ask her whether she was concerned that basically a whole bundle of human characteristics had been put together and medicalized and now called ADHD, which required pharmaceutical intervention, and asked her, did she worry about this? I mean, that's not necessarily my view, but on the other hand, I couldn't let her just bang on for 9 minutes about how drugs had helped her work as a secondary school modern languages teacher. Or I felt I couldn't. I mean, you could profoundly disagree with me. I mean, believe me, I'm well used to it. But we did get a number of complaints from people who said I was extremely dismissive about ADHD, and clearly I knew nothing about it, and I was a horrible woman. And how dare I suggest that the pharmaceutical industry might be making money out of ADHD? I don't know. I mean, it's very, very difficult. What I have learned is you can never get it right. Had I not had a single mildly skeptical question, I'd have been criticised for that too. So you tell me, Say, what do you think?
I wouldn't do your job.
I don't know why I do it.
She isn't. She's not doing it either. She's just quit. It's taken her 13 years to work it out. But you are. So tell us. So I mean, clearly today's been a bad day at the office for you, and
yes, it has.
I'm glad we've been able to provide a bit of lunchtime.
Well, not a bad day, because as I said to what I'm doing now is I sit at the desk and I just reply to the emails of criticism, just because it gives me something to do after the programme, and also I can vent a little bit. And I'm always scrupulously polite, never. But I should say there's only one reaction worse than lots of criticism and carping, and that's just no reaction at all. And
exactly.
And what I've always done in that role is attract comment, and some of it is positive, but an awful lot isn't. But the bosses keep me there, or kept me there, precisely for that reason, because I got up the nose of people. That's Scousers for you, I'm afraid.
Indeed. So clearly some challenging times. What were the highlights of the last 13 years? Have you done a programme like this yet? Is somebody expecting you to do
No,
that?
I don't want to do a highlights. They're always bloody awful,
Right.
those programmes.
Well, tell us anyway.
Woman leaves radio programme, who cares?
I think we'd like to know. Say, would be interested in knowing. Say's a great fan of he was just before we came on air. Yeah, we all love Woman's Hour. What did you say? Yeah. Is it what percentage of men listen to Woman's Hour?
It's about 40%, 42%. It sort of varies. Obviously, we don't want it to go above 50, because then we are up shit creek. So it has to stay around 40%. That's absolutely fine. I've had loads of highlights. I mean, but at its best, the programme does original content that you would not hear anywhere else. And actually, tomorrow I have recorded an interview already with a woman. It's a terrible story. A woman who was raped by actually her former husband. There was a terrible, terrible assault. The man got a really long prison sentence, and she emailed us to express the view that she believes she got the sort of justice that might be denied to a woman who was not like her. So she's white, professional, middle class, articulate, went to the police as soon as she possibly could, went through all the hideous exams and examinations and everything else, and presented as the perfect victim. Ended up with absolute justice, and is now really guilty and guilt-ridden about the fact that she's had justice, which is very much a female experience. And that is something that I don't think you would hear anywhere else. I don't think you'd hear that interview on any other programme. The things I despair of are slightly psycho-babbly items, which just make me despair genuinely, and then interviewing celebrities, which I fundamentally hate. because I don't like celebrities very much.
Will you that kind of giving a platform to things that don't wouldn't have happened if it wasn't for Woman's Hour? Will you miss that
Yes.
side of it? Because you're taking your fortunately podcast that you do with Fee Glover, that's now going on to Radio 4, isn't it?
That's going to be made into a cut down radio friendly version with no swearing in it. Which is, they're still putting out very late at night.
Right.
Because we're so awful, because we're women of a certain age who swear, God forbid. A Woman's Hour is a great program. I'm really proud to have done it. I think providing decent content in lockdown has been a bit trying, because obviously most people are not working in the office. We're only allowed 3 people in the office at any one time. It's quite difficult. It's quite difficult to have creative. This works for something like this, but for a meeting where you would like a bit of argy-bargy and discord and ideas being generated, it's not great at the moment, really.
No,
so that's a shame.
Yeah,
no. But I mean, it's a great program, brilliant audience on the whole, lots of great feedback, just feedback generally, and I really will miss it. But I think I think Radio 4 it keeps people on programs far too long. Bloody hell. I mean, we literally, up until recently, did have a presenter well into his 90s. Melvin Bragg, wonderful head of hair, but he's I think he's as old as my dad, if not older. It's a
Alistair Cook.
Alistair Cook, well, he's gone now. Laurie Taylor, who
Nicholas
knows my
Parsons.
mom. Nicholas. I mean, it's just.
And then they wonder why they're struggling to attract the younger audience.
Although Humphrey Lyttelton was excellent to the very end.
No, I don't deny it, but I think sometimes you've got to be self-aware enough to know. You know what? I think I can shove off now. I think I've done my sentence.
Now, talking of the younger audience, I did say that we would be joined by Holly Ellis, who is the Scouse scientist. Holly, could somebody let Holly in or help her come in? I don't quite know the technical method of doing it. The team will do that. So Holly is there. She is. Hi, Holly.
Hi.
Well, why don't you tell us all about yourself? I know you're a fan of the podcast. You wrote a review. You see, if people would only write more reviews on Apple Podcasts, etc., they never know where they would end up. Holly, tell us all about yourself as the Scouse scientist.
Yes, so my name's Holly and I'm from Liverpool, and I grew up in Liverpool and went to a regular comprehensive school. I then went to Oxford University and did a degree in biological sciences, and now I work at Liverpool Women's Hospital as a clinical scientist in genetics. And I basically started the Scouse Scientist about a year ago now, because I felt like there weren't enough role models in science that young girls from Merseyside could relate to. So when we see scientists on the TV and the media, they're often, no offence to Tom, but
old blokes like me.
A bit like Tom.
At least I've got some hair, not like that old bloke there. Yeah. He's even worse.
The kind of like the stereotypical white middle class male who's quite well spoken, and I just think, how on earth can young girls from working class backgrounds look up to them and think that that's something that they can aspire to? So there's obviously a lot of stereotypes associated with going to Oxford or Cambridge, and also going on to do a career in science. People think you've got to be posh, you've got to be rich, you've got to look a certain way, speak a certain way. And I just wanted to create something to show young people, well, actually, I don't fit into any of those stereotypes. So just be yourself, and if that's what you want to do, then just go for it.
And how much success are you having in terms of what kind of things are you doing, and how much conversion rate are you getting in terms of young women going into science?
So it's been really a lot more successful than I thought. So I put the first video on YouTube as the Scouse Scientist about a year ago, and it just kind of went from one thing to another. So I've done a few things with the BBC Northwest did an interview with me. I went on BBC Radio Merseyside, Liverpool Echo, basically just using any platform I can to spread the message as far as possible. And then I started, there was kind of a pressure to go into schools and talk to children and the older students even. So I started doing that before lockdown, but then obviously when all the schools shut, that came to a halt. But I am hoping to carry on with that in the future.
Say.
Well, it's fantastic. Can I ask you a question? So
Yes.
I don't know if you ever listened to the Life Scientific with Jim Al-Khalili, where he talks to leading scientists about how they ended up doing what they did. And a lot of them, some of them were the first person in the house to go to university, had different expectations. A lot of them had different expectations. And never thought they would cut in science. And then somebody believed in them. It was a teacher, usually, less often a parent. And they said, because I thought I could actually do it. I could actually disturb the universe, you know. And it gets me thinking, how many people haven't got that person? You know, what would you have done if there wasn't that teacher that believed in you, that told you could do it? I mean, what's your feelings around that?
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with that. For me, my mum, so I'm an only child and I was just brought up with my mum, so she was the person for me who always said, you can do whatever you want, and any idea I had or anything I wanted to do, she was like my person who would be like, go for it. But yeah, you're right, a lot of people unfortunately don't have anyone to kind of spur them on, and hopefully for those people, I can maybe be that person and they can look to me and think, well, if she's done it and she's from the same background as me, then I can do it too. And that's really the aim of the whole Scouse Scientist that I've created.
Can you just tell me a bit about, sorry, thank you, Tom. Can you just tell me what you do? You say you're a geneticist, but what does that mean on a daily basis? What does that mean at the Women's Hospital?
Yeah, so I work in the lab here, that's where I am now, and basically it's diagnosing people and families with genetic disorders. So we don't actually see the patients face to face, but we test their sample, analyse the DNA, and then write a report which will then go to the clinician or genetic counsellor, and then our results will get obviously delivered to the patient and their families. So in a obviously there's a lot more to it, but in a quick sentence, then yeah, that's roughly what we do day to day. So the YouTube channel, I've also filmed some stuff in the lab as well, so people can see actually what goes on behind the scenes, because another part of it is obviously when people think of the NHS, they think of doctors, nurses, midwives. No one really thinks of scientists being involved in the NHS, but obviously we are quite a huge part of the workforce. Have you,
Holly, have you sort of been recognised as a key worker when everyone is out clapping in the streets? Were you out there taking a bow?
Well, I don't know about that. I think my neighbours know where I work, but I'm not sure they know actually exactly what I do. Up until now, obviously they do with all the videos and stuff, but we've not been directly involved in any of the COVID testing as of yet, so I don't feel like I can really take credit for that.
Oh, you can get involved.
you should do. Let me feed in just now a few more comments from our audience before we wrap up. Let's see. Jane, you are a celebrity, says Shirley Miller. So
thank you, Shirley. Yes,
you have to accept that, and
I'll take it.
Sue Pallam on Facebook. Let's see. Okay, it's all about words and use of words. Okay, let's see what else we have. Social history is important. Clearly, that's important when we're thinking about things like previous flu pandemics. There are some comments also of people who were involved or have relatives who were involved in the 1918 flu who have talked about it a lot subsequently.
Well, that's good.
Brilliant to have Holly on. People, thank you for joining us, Holly. Jane, when was the last time you had a young female scientist on Woman's Hour?
Well, we had a couple of engineers on last week talking about the hydrogen train. So we do. I mean, in fact, it's interesting. Those are the items that I enjoy and that the audience like as well. So I'll get up before I stop doing Woman's Hour. I'll get Holly on.
Oh, great.
Well, that's it. I mean, I didn't want to
Go.
don't want to put you in a
basically
position.
what you were saying, wasn't
No,
it? Yes.
I didn't want to say it like that because I didn't want to push you in a position.
Put it
but,
this way, Tom. She's got more chance of getting on than either you or Say, to be absolutely.
I know. Well, Jane, I have been on a couple of times, but
have you?
it was a rare honour among all the different things I've been on. To be on Woman's Hour was a
You
great honour.
peaked. Yeah.
Yes, it's all been downhill since then. Anyway, it is, I think, time for us to wrap up because we're told about 45 minutes is the ideal length for a podcast. So let me just find my closing comments so that I don't forget to say important things. And the important things to say are to thank our guests for joining us today, to thank the team behind the whole operation, Amelia, Jen, Chris, Claire, Sian, thank you all very much to them. Very importantly, our next Scouse Science podcast is on the 3rd of October, and we have Andy Burnham, the Manchester Metro Mayor, and Emily Adams from the School of Tropical Medicine. So put that date in your diaries now. If you haven't yet done so, I know many people have, follow those links that I put in the chat function and go and find the podcast and listen to some of the back issues. They've all been quite fun, and you can rate, review and subscribe. But I think that's just about everything for now. So we should all say thank you very much and goodbye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.